Chapter 18 of Blackbeard, Buccaneer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. Blackbeard, Buccaneer by Ralph D. Paine. The old buccaneer is loyal. Sorrow mingled with rejoicing when the King George brigantine sailed into Charlestown harbour. The sea fight off Cherokee Inlet had taken a heavy toll of brave seamen, and there were vacant chairs and aching hearts ashore. But the fiendish Blackbeard had been blotted out, and would no more harry the coast. Small and rude as was this pioneer settlement, it was most fair and attractive to the eyes of young Master Cockerell and Joe Hawkridge. In the house of Uncle Peter Forbes they rested at their ease, and planned sedate careers for themselves. Even the treasure ceased to be uppermost in their lively discussions. It could wait a while. They were no longer under the spell of its influence. This different world in which they now dwelt so contentedly made their adventures seem like shadowy figments with precious little romance in them. And neither lad expressed any great anxiety to go exploring the noisome Cherokee swamp and to challenge the ghost of Blackbeard. Without a sign of rebellion, Jack returned to his books and lessons in Parson Throckmorton's garden. The learning already acquired he began to pass on to Joe Hawkridge, who was a zealous pupil, and determined to read and write and cipher without letting the grass grow under his feet. It was this young pirate's ambition to make a shipping merchant of himself. Councillor Forbes found him employment in a warehouse where the planters traded their rice, resin, and indigo for the varied merchandise brought out from England. Jack aspired to manage his uncle's plantation, and to acquire lands of his own, and some day to sit in the governor's council. Of a Sunday he went to the little English church, dressed in his best and using a cane, for he limped from the wound in his thigh. Joe Hawkridge walked with him, careful to banish his grin, and sat in the councillor's pew, where he paid proper attention to the prayers and responses. This caused some gossip, but the ocean waif was winning his way to favour by dint of industry, a shrewd wit, and his perennial good humour. Frequently they escorted fair Dorothy Stewart home from church. She was fonder than ever of stalwart Master Cockerell, because the colonel had told her he would have been a dead man had not the lad intervened to save him from the stroke of a negro pirate. Alas, however, it was not that sentimental devotion for which the lovelorn Jack yearned, and he confided to Joe that his existence was blighted. This evoked no sympathy from the fickle Hawkridge, who was forgetting his black-eyed lass in the Azores, and was already a slave to Dorothy Stewart. She laughed at them both, and was their true friend, tender and whimsical, and anxious for their welfare. It was a valuable chapter in their education. One morning, while Joe was at work in the warehouse near the harbour, he heard a commotion in the street and was about to run out when his employer came in and explained, "2 pirates captured, just as I happened to pass. The knaves landed from a boat in broad daylight, unaware that Charlestown has mended its loose habit towards such gentry." "What will be done with him?" quickly asked Joe, with an unhappy premonition. "They were recognised as 2 of Stede Bonnet's old hands that used to resort to the tavern. Soldiers of the governor's guard have been sent for to drag them to the jail." Joe hastened out, but slackened his pace to lag behind the crowd of idlers who were jostling the prisoners along with hoots and jeers. Yes, there was the tall, gaunt frame and grey head of old Trimble Rogers, whose mien was so forbidding and masterful that the mob forbore to handle him too roughly, unarmed though he was. At his elbow trudged chubby Bill Saxby, gazing about him with those wide blue eyes in which was not a trace of guile. Joe realized that for him to intercede would make matters worse. He was a reformed pirate on probation, and was known to have sailed with Blackbeard himself. Therefore he darted into another street and sped to find Jack Cockerell, who chanced to be at home. They rushed into the room where Uncle Peter Forbes was writing at his desk, and informed him that their 2 staunch comrades had come ashore to find them, and were already in custody, and something must be done to save them from the wrath of Governor Johnson, who had a mortal distaste for pirates still at large. The councillor calmed the perturbation by assuring them, "I have already spoken to His Excellency in behalf of these 2 men should they appear in this port. He was not wholly pleased, but promised clemency if they should offer to repent, and if I gave surety for the pledge. "They'll be ready to live as respectable as Joe," impetuously declared Master Cockerell. "I'll go bail on it. Bill Saxby is a tradesman by nature, and if you'll lend him enough money to set himself up as a linen draper and haberdasher, Uncle Peter, he can live happily ever after." "And old Trimble Rogers has sailed his last cruise under the Jolly Roger, Councillor," put in Joe Hawkridge. "His timbers are full of dry rot, and he seeks a safe mooring." "There seems to be no end to the bad company you drag me into," quoth Uncle Peter. "My hat and broadcloth cloak, Jack. Let us fare to the jail, and see what these awkward visitors have to say. After that I will attend upon the governor." In better spirits, the anxious lads followed the dignified secretary of the council to the strongly built jail on the edge of the town. In a very gloomy cell behind iron bars, they found the luckless brace of pirates, shackled hand and foot. Bill Saxby took it like a placid philosopher, but the ancient Buccaneer was spitting Spanish oaths and condemning the hospitality of Charlestown in violent terms. He quieted instantly at sight of his young friends, and the harsh, wrinkled visage fairly beamed as he shouted, "Our camarade this, Bill! Here they be to haul us out of this filthy hole! I forgive the unmannerly folks that allus used to welcome us." They shook hands through the bars, while Uncle Peter stood aside. He felt that his official station forbade his joining this fraternal reunion. In the narrow corridor he chatted with the jailer to pass the time, while Bill Saxby was explaining to the lads, "We was in duty bound, in a manner of speaking, to run you down as soon as possible, and make a report. Trimble?" "Aye, Bill, to see what was to be done about the treasure. We wouldn't have had 'em think we'd run off with it. D'ye see, Master Cockerell, me and Bill took Captain Bonnet into our confidence. He is an honourable man, and to be mentioned along with the great Captain Edward Davis, what I was shipmates with in the South Sea." "Stow it, grandsire," cried Bill. "I don't want to linger in jail while you spin that long-winded yarn. Tell the lads what they want to know." "If I weren't chained to the wall, Bill, I'd put my fist in your eye," severely retorted the veteran. "As I was a-saying, Captain Bonnet was all courtesy, and allowed the treasure belonged to us, and he was ready to help find it. We told him we had to join up with our gentleman partner, Master Cockerell, and win his consent," said Bill, "afore we put our hooks on that blessed sea chest." "Which is exactly how I felt about you," Jack told them, and he was greatly touched by this proof of their unbending fidelity. "But how did you manage it to reach Charlestown?" "Captain Bonnet hove to outside the bar last night," explained Trimble Rogers, "and gave us a handy boat to sail in with." The weary Joe Hawkridge took alarm at this and put a finger to his lips. It was unwise to parade the fact that Stede Bonnet cruised so near. His Excellency, the Governor, was anxious that he should share the fate of Blackbeard. Jack Cockerell had no fear that his Uncle Peter would be a tale-bearer. His private honour would forbid, because this interview with the two lads was a privileged communication. What made Jack a little anxious was the presence of the jail-keeper in the corridor. He was a sneaking sort of man, soft of tread and oily of speech, and inclined to curry favour with those in authority. Councillor Peter Forbes had tactfully withdrawn this person beyond earshot, but he began to edge toward the cell. Old Trimble Rogers tried to heed Joe's cautionary signal, but what he meant to be a whisper was a hoarse rumble as he explained, "Captain Bonnet sends word he'll be off this coast again in 30 days. He will come ashore himself to Sullivan's Island to get the answer, whether you are to go with us, Master Cockerell, to Cherokee Inlet." Jack glanced at the jail-keeper, but he was a dozen feet away and deep in talk with Mr. Forbes. There was no sign that this confidence had been overheard. Bill Saxby scolded the Buccaneer for his careless speech, for the old man had been a freebooter too long to be easily tamed. With artful design, Jack led him away from this dangerous ground and suggested, "You are done with pirating, and will you both be ready to stay ashore in Charlestown after this certain errand is accomplished?" "I swear it, gladly, and on my own Bible," answered Trimble Rogers. "Swear it for me," said Bill Saxby. Mr. Forbes interrupted and told the lads to go home and await his conference with Governor Johnson. It proved to be a session somewhat stormy. but the upshot was a pardon conditioned on good behaviour. The convincing argument was that these men had been faithful to Master Cockerell through thick and thin, and had saved him from perishing in the Cherokee swamp. Moreover, it might be an inducement to others of Stede Bonnet's crew to surrender themselves and forsake their evil ways. No sooner were these two pirates released from jail than they found an active friend in Mr. Peter Forbes. He went about it quietly, for obvious reasons, but he felt under great obligation to them for their goodness to his nephew. Just at this time, one of the shopkeepers became a bankrupt because of unthrifty habits and too much card-playing. Through an agent, Peter Forbes purchased the stock of muslins and calicoes, of brocades and taffetas, and calash bonnets, satin petticoats, shoe buckles, laces and buttons, and having given his promissory notes for said merchandise, Bill Saxby proudly hung his own signboard over the door. There was a flutter among the ladies. Here was a noteworthy sensation, to be served by an obsequious pirate with innocent blue eyes, who had sailed the Spanish Main. A few days, and it was evident that William Saxby, late of London, would conduct a thriving trade. He was fairly enraptured with his good fortune and congenial occupation, and took it most amiably when Jack Cockerell or Joe Hawkridge sauntered in to tease him. He was disgrace to Stede Bonnet, said they, and never had a pirate fallen to such a low estate as this. Trimble Rogers was in no situation to rant at smug William the linen draper. The old sea-wolf, who had outlived the most glorious era of the storied Buccaneers, had a few gold pieces tucked away in his belt, and at first he was content to loaf about the tavern, with an audience to listen to his wondrous tales, which ranged from Henry Morgan to the great Captain Edward Davis. But he had never been a sot or an idler, and soon he found himself lending a hand to assist the landlord in this way or that. And when disorder occurred, a word from this grey, hawk-eyed rover was enough to quell the wildest roisterers from the plantations. Children strayed to the tavern green to sit upon his knee and twist those fierce mustachios of his, and their mothers ceased to snatch them away when they learned to know him better. Sometimes in his leisure hours he pored over his tattered little Bible with muttering lips, and found pleasure in the psalmist's denunciation of his enemies, who were undoubtedly Spaniards in some other guise. He puttered about the flower beds with spade and rake, and kept the bowling green clipped close with a keen sickle. In short, there was a niche for Trimble Rogers in his old age, and he seemed well satisfied to fill it. Just as Admiral Benbow spent his time among his daisies at Deptford when he was not bombarding or blockading the French fleet off Dunkirk. Jack Cockerell halted for a chat while passing the tavern, and these two shipmates retired to a quiet corner of the porch. The blind fiddler was plying a lively bow, and a dozen boys and girls danced on the turf. Trimble Rogers surveyed them with a fatherly aspect as he said, "They ain't afeard of me, Jack, not one of 'em. Was ever a worn-out hulk laid up in a fairer berth?" "None of the sea fever left, Trimble? What about Captain Bonnet? He's due off the bar 2 days hence. My uncle frowns upon my sailing with him to seek the treasure. He insists that I steer clear of pirates." "And that's entirely proper, Jack. I look at things different like, now I be a worthy citizen. 'Tis better to fit out a little expedition of our own. We can drag silly Bill out of his rubbishy shop. Oh, he will come fast enough after a while. We're all tired of the sea just now," said Jack. "What about Captain Bonnet and meeting him at Sullivan's Island to pass the word that we must decline his courteous invitation?" "I shall tend to that," answered the retired Buccaneer, "and from what gossip I glean in the tavern, Captain Bonnet had best steer for his home port of Barbados and quit his fancy pirating. This fractious governor has set his heart on hanging him, and Colonel Stewart is up and about again and has ordered the King George to fit for sea. 'Tis rumoured he has sent messages to the northward for Lieutenant Maynard to sail another cruise in his company." "Then be sure you warn Stede Bonnet," strongly advised Jack. "I would not be disloyal to the province or to mine own uncle, but one good turn deserves another." 2 days after this, Trimble Rogers vanished from the tavern and found Jack's canoe tied in a cove beyond the settled part of the town. It was in the evening of the same day that Jack was reading in his room by candlelight when a tap-tap on the window shutter startled him. He threw it open and dimly perceived that Dorothy Stewart stood there. Her face was white in the gloom, and she wore a dress of some dark stuff. At her beckoning gesture, Jack slipped through the window and silently led her into the lane. "Oh, Jack, I've been so torn betwixt scruples," she softly confided, "and I hope I am not doing wrong. But if I am disloyal to my dear father, may I be forgiven. But I've made myself believe that there is a stronger obligation." "It concerns Stede Bonnet?" murmured Jack, reading the motive of the secret errand. "Yes, you are bound to befriend him, Jack, on your honour as a gentleman. He has been warned to keep clear of Charlestown, Dorothy. Trimble Rogers has gone off to meet him. But it is worse than that. The keeper of the jail, Jason Cutter, was closeted with my father this morning. I heard something that was said. Soldiers have been sent to Sullivan's Island." "To capture Captain Bonnet?" wrathfully exclaimed Jack. "Did Colonel Stewart go with them? Does he know why Stede Bonnet risks putting into this harbour in a small boat? Does to do a deed of pure friendship and chivalry?" "All that my father understands is what the jailer reported," replied Dorothy, "and the governor acted on this evidence. No, he did not go with the troops, but sent a major in command. Too late for me to be of service, alas. If they take Captain Bonnet alive, he will most certainly hang. And Bill Saxby and Trimble Rogers will be embroiled in some desperate attempt to aid his escape from jail. I am a dreadful wicked girl to be thus in league with pirates," sighed Mistress Dorothy. "But I confess to you, Jack dear, that it would grieve my heart to see this charming pirate wear a hempen halter." "My rival, is he? So I have found you out," flared Jack, pretending vast indignation. "Nevertheless, I shall still be true to him." "And to me, I trust," she fondly replied. "Oh, I feel so thankful that faithful Trimble Rogers is keeping tryst. He will hear the soldiers blundering about in time to make Captain Bonnet take heed and shove off." Jack walked home with her, very glad of the excuse, but with jealousy rankling in his bosom. It was not a lasting malady, however, and he had forgotten it next morning when he went early to the tavern to look for Trimble Rogers. There he found the major of the detachment at breakfast with an extraordinary story to tell. He had made a landing on Sullivan's Island after dark, and deployed some of his men to patrol the beach that faced the ocean. The squad, which remained with him, had surprised a man lurking amongst the trees. Pursued and fired at, he had led them on an infernal chase till they burst out upon the open beach. There they heard the sound of oars and voices in a boat which was making in for the shore. The hunted man raised his voice in one stentorian shout of, "Pull out to sea, Captain Bonnet, and wear this coast. The soldiers are on my heels. Oh, Trimble Rogers sends a fare ye well." The boat was wrenched about in a trice and moved away from the island, soon disappearing in the direction of the bar. The major's men had shot at it, but without effect. When they had rushed to capture the fugitive who had shouted the warning, they found him prone upon the sand. There was not a scratch on him, and yet he was quite dead. The prodigious exertion had broken his heart, ventured the major, and it had ceased to beat. His body would be prepared for Christian burial, because of the esteem in which he was already held by many of the townspeople. To Jack Cockerell and Joe Hawkridge it was sad news indeed. The tender-hearted Bill Saxby mourned like one who had lost a parent. He closed the shop for a day and hung black ribbons on the knob. They agreed that the end had come for Trimble Rogers as he would have wished it, giving his life in loyal service to a friend and master. And perhaps it was better thus than for the creeping disabilities of old age to overtake him. "He knew he was liable to pop off," said Bill, "with the rheumatism getting closer to his heart all the time. And he told me, did Trimble, that his share of the treasure was to go to the poor and needy of the town. Orphans and such was Trimble's weakness." End of chapter 18.